George was a quiet, well-behaved boy who often daydreamed and played alone. That was until a new student named Sebastian transferred into his class. Sebastian wasn't like other kids. He had strange eyes, as if he was always looking through people, and his smile never reached his eyes. At first, George found Sebastian intriguing. He knew lots of strange games, creepy stories, and spoke in a way that sent shivers down people's spines. One day during recess, Sebastian invited George to the abandoned storage shed behind the school, rumored to be the site of a deadly accident. The two of them played a game called Spirit Hunt. But when it was George's turn to be hunted, Sebastian stopped pretending. He leaned in close and whispered, "I know what you did to the drowned cat in your garden." George turned pale. He had never told anyone about that. It had been an accident. The cat panicked and jumped into the pond, and George was too scared to help it. How could Sebastian know? Sebastian continued, his voice sharp and cold. "If you don't confess to the teacher, I'll tell them. They like kids with guilt." Terrified and under pressure, George cried and falsely admitted to hurting a neighbor's cat. It caused a brief investigation, but was quickly dismissed. George's mother, suspicious, questioned him until he finally confessed the truth. She contacted Sebastian's mother. The woman spoke in a hushed tone, as if afraid someone was listening. "Sebastian has problems. He's seen several doctors, but nothing helps. Sometimes I think my son isn't really himself anymore." Despite a bad feeling, George's mother agreed to a sleepover at Sebastian's house to help build the friendship. That night, George arrived at an old, creaky house where the lights flickered and the walls were covered in charcoal drawings, all of them distorted, eyeless faces. Sebastian said he wanted George to meet a special friend, and led him to the basement. Down there, under a dim yellow light, stood a cracked, dusty mirror and soot-covered handprints smeared on the walls. Sebastian sat down and began muttering gibberish. George panicked and tried to run, but the mirror began to tremble violently. For a split second, George saw a gaunt, faceless figure standing behind Sebastian, leaning close to his ear. George screamed and blacked out. When he woke up, he was in his own bed. His mother told him Sebastian had been expelled the next morning after another incident. A student was locked in the bathroom, and red, blood-like words had been scrawled on the walls, "My eyes see your sins." Sebastian's family vanished without a trace. The house was abandoned, but George occasionally saw a shadowy figure at the upstairs window. And every time, he'd hear a whisper in his mind, "I'm still here, and they are too." From that night on, George started seeing movements in mirrors, even when no one was standing in front of them. Whenever he touched the glass, he felt something touching back. As he grew older, George began to suffer from insomnia. Dark circles formed under his eyes, and he often woke up at 3 a.m., when the darkness in his room became thick and heavy. Every mirror in the house was covered with paper, but sometimes his mother caught him standing before the old fireplace glass, whispering to someone. When she asked, he only said, "I have to keep them in the mirror. If I stop talking, they'll get out." George was no longer a normal child. In every drawing he made, there was always a face without eyes, watching. I grew up in a small, quiet town in the heart of the Bible Belt, in a Baptist family that held its faith like a tight, unyielding thread. Our lives were intertwined with the rituals of church services, Bible study groups, and Sunday potlucks. But behind the stained glass windows and the comforting hum of hymns, my mother carried a secret, a darkness she tried to hide, even from herself. She was a devoted woman, always caring, always there, but something was off. I could never quite place it, not as a child, but there were moments, odd moments, when her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, or when she would lapse into strange, unexplainable behaviors. I remember the first time I noticed something was wrong, truly wrong. I was about 10 years old, playing outside on a summer afternoon when I heard the sound of a car screeching to a halt in the driveway. I ran to the window, thinking it was my father coming home from work. Instead, it was my mother, standing motionless at the foot of the driveway, staring at something in her hands. As I got closer, I saw that she was holding a snake. A large, black one. Her fingers were coiled tightly around it, her knuckles pale with tension. I froze, not understanding. She had always been terrified of snakes. She could never even look at them in a book or on television. But here she was, holding one like it was the most natural thing in the world. The snake coiled lazily in her hands, flicking its tongue, unbothered by her grip. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. Her head snapped around to look at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. For a moment, there was nothing behind them, just an empty, hollow gaze. She blinked, as if coming out of a trance. "What snake?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost confused. She dropped the snake onto the ground and stepped away from it, as if it had never been there at all. I tried to speak, but the words got stuck in my throat. My mother looked at me with a soft smile, her eyes once again normal, as if nothing had happened. The snake was gone, and in its place was the woman I knew, the woman who cooked our meals, who tucked me into bed, who smiled at the church potlucks. She had no memory of what had just occurred. I didn't tell anyone about it, not then. I didn't know how. But that moment stayed with me, deep in my gut, gnawing at me. As the years passed, the incidents became more frequent. The behaviors more erratic. There were the times when she would disappear in the middle of the night, only to be found hours later in the church parking lot, standing motionless in the dark, staring at the building with an odd, distant look on her face. Or the time she went to the kitchen, started humming hymns under her breath, and then began arranging the cutlery in bizarre, symmetrical patterns, completely oblivious to everything around her. When I asked her why she was doing it, she simply smiled and said, "I'm preparing for something important." There were other times, even stranger ones. I'd come home from school to find her sitting in the dark, her hands clenched into fists, muttering to herself in a language I didn't understand. Once, she told me that she had spoken to God, and he had told her to go to the woods. I followed her that day, worried, and found her standing in the forest, staring up at the trees, her face pale and slack. She was saying nothing, but her lips moved as though she were speaking to someone, or something, that only she could see. As I got older, I began to question what was happening. I researched her symptoms, hallucinations, dissociation, strange memory loss, and the answers terrified me. But I never said a word to anyone. I kept the truth locked away, buried beneath the surface of our perfect, church-going family. I tried to carry on, to pretend that nothing was wrong, but the cracks were beginning to show. It wasn't until I was a teenager, when my mother vanished for 3 days, that the full extent of her condition became undeniable. She was gone. My father and I searched everywhere, contacting neighbors, local hospitals, even the police. But there was no sign of her. And then, on the 3rd day, she returned, just as suddenly as she had left. She was standing in the doorway when we found her. Her clothes were torn, her skin scratched and bruised, and her eyes were wide with fear. She looked at me, her voice shaky. "They're coming," she whispered. "They told me they're coming. We have to prepare." I never understood what she meant. She never spoke of it again. But I saw the fear in her eyes, the deep, hollow terror that lingered there, and I knew she was fighting something, something inside her, something she could never escape. Years later, when I was an adult, I found out the truth. My mother had been suffering from undiagnosed mental illness for as long as I could remember. The behaviors, the disappearances, the strange actions, they were all symptoms of something that no one, not even she, could understand. And it had been with her for much longer than any of us realized. But what still haunts me the most is the look in her eyes when she spoke of them. Whoever or whatever they were, I will never know. I can only wonder if they were a part of her mind, a part of the sickness that consumed her. Or if they were something darker, something she tried to warn me about. All I know is that the shadows of her mind will never truly leave me. I always thought our family was normal, well, as normal as any family could be. My husband, Sam, and I raised our 2 boys in a modest house, a place filled with laughter, arguments, and the occasional noise of a broken toy. But there was something odd about our house. Something that, for years, we couldn't explain. Both of our sons, Ethan and Jacob, had the same strange habit: they would sleepwalk. It wasn't the usual kind of sleepwalking where they wandered aimlessly around the house or stumbled into walls. No, theirs was far more specific, far more unnerving. Every night, without fail, both of them would rise from their beds in the dead of night, their eyes blank and unseeing. The first time it happened, I assumed it was just a one-time thing. I woke up to the sound of soft thuds and stumbled into the hallway to find Ethan, my eldest, standing in front of the living room wall, tapping his forehead gently against it. His eyes were wide open, but they didn't seem to focus on anything. I called out to him softly, but he didn't respond. When I touched his shoulder, he simply turned and shuffled back to his room, as though nothing had happened. I thought it was a fluke, something strange but harmless. But it happened again the next night. And the next. Soon, Jacob, our younger son, began doing the same thing. He would wake in the middle of the night and walk straight to the same spot where Ethan had been, gently tapping his forehead against the same spot on the wall. Both boys never remembered a thing the next morning. They would be completely unaware of their strange nocturnal behavior, and it made no sense to me. At first, I dismissed it as some weird sleepwalking quirk. But then it began to escalate. The wall where they tapped their heads started to show signs of wear, small indentations where their foreheads had made contact night after night. It was becoming unsettling. Years passed, and we never really thought about it much until we decided to renovate the house. We had been living there for over a decade, and it seemed like the right time to update the old place. The first day of the renovation, we hired a crew to take down the wallpaper in the living room, which had been there since the house was built. As the workers stripped the layers of paper off, one of them paused and called me over. "Ma'am," he said, "you might want to take a look at this." I walked over, expecting to see a section of damaged wall or some mold, but what I saw was far more unsettling. Behind the wallpaper, hidden in the exact spot where Ethan and Jacob had always tapped their foreheads, was a large, ornate mirror. It was old, much older than the house itself, and it was buried beneath multiple layers of wallpaper and paint. The frame was intricately carved with strange, almost unnatural patterns, and the glass was cracked in several places, giving the mirror an eerie, unsettling look. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if the mirror had been waiting there, hidden, for decades. But the real shock came when I noticed something even stranger. The marks on the wall, the indentations from where the boys had been tapping their foreheads, lined up perfectly with the cracks in the mirror. It was as if the mirror had been calling them. As if it had been guiding them to that exact spot every night. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, chalking it up to coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I told Sam about it that evening, and he was just as unnerved as I was. We decided to keep the mirror hidden from the boys. But over the next few weeks, things only got worse. Ethan and Jacob's sleepwalking increased in frequency. They would wake up in the middle of the night and wander straight to the living room, heading directly to the wall where the mirror had been hidden. They would stand there, staring blankly, as if waiting for something to happen. One night, I decided to stay up and watch them. I hid in the shadows of the hallway and waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Around 2 a.m., Ethan stirred in his bed, got up, and walked out of his room, his eyes glazed over. I held my breath as he approached the spot on the wall. But instead of tapping his head like he usually did, he reached out, his fingers brushing the wall as if he were trying to touch something just beyond it. Jacob followed shortly after, and together, the two of them stood in front of the wall, silent and unmoving. My pulse raced, and I couldn't breathe. I wanted to call out to them, to shake them awake, but something held me back. A cold sensation washed over me, as if the house itself was holding its breath. And then, in the dead silence of the night, the air shifted. The room seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. I stepped forward, just a few paces, when the boys suddenly turned toward me, their eyes wide open but completely unseeing. Their voices, in unison, spoke a single word. "Mother." I stumbled back, fear flooding through me. They both turned back to the wall, and the moment they did, the mirror, now revealed, flickered with a brief flash of light. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the mirror seemed to shimmer, almost alive, as if it were breathing. I couldn't explain it. I didn't want to. I grabbed the boys, pulling them away from the spot, and we left the house that night, unable to stay any longer. I don't know what the mirror wanted, but I wasn't about to let my family become part of it. We never went back. The house was sold off, the renovations unfinished, and the mirror left behind, still hidden within its walls. But sometimes, I still hear the boys mumbling in their sleep, as if calling to something far away. And I wonder, deep down, if whatever was in that mirror is still waiting for them, watching, waiting for the right moment to call them back.